The G.I. Joe story of Kamakura takes an interesting path through multiple publishers, writers, and the character himself passing through a few iterations and evolutions. Today is all about Sean Collins, so let's break it all down. When Kamakura first arrived on the scene in 2003, his government name was still noted as classified, but now we know more. Separately, a character named Sean appeared in Marvel's G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero comic book series by Larry Hama in the 1980s. It took many years for these two events to link up, and with that, we're going to jump to Snake Eyes. During the Vietnam War, Snake Eyes was still part of a 6-man LRP unit. This team was Snake Eyes, Ramon Escobedo, Dickie Saperstein, Tommy Arashikage, aka Storm Shadow, Lonzo Wilkinson, aka Stalker, and a guy named Wade Collins. On one patrol, with Wade on point with his suppressed Swedish K, the unit was ambushed and hit. Wade took a few rounds across the chest while Dickie stepped on a mine and Ramon was shot in the head, with the rest barely able to make it out. Wade was thought dead, but ended up captured by NVA regulars and held prisoner for a couple of years in harsh conditions. On the Cobra organization side, Cobra Commander has multiple ranks of troops and soldiers under his command. The Cobra troops and Cobra Vipers take up the majority of the work on the battlefield. An elite unit, dubbed the Crimson Guard, or CG, are the most highly trained and lethal of all Cobra elements. Their role is more insidious and surreptitious. CGs tend to infiltrate the civilian world, including politicians, science, law, and infrastructure, either individually or in sleeper cells where they lay in wait until they're activated by Cobra Command. One of the criteria for the first wave of CGs was to undergo plastic surgery and take on the name Fred. The first off the line was a guy named Fred Brocas. Fred was assigned to a post just outside of the Fort Wadsworth motor pool, which hid G.I. Joe headquarters in the sublevels. Fred lived there on the perimeter of the base with his family, including a son named Sean Brocas and a daughter named Heather Brocas. This is where we find the Brocas family in A Real American Hero issue 30 when the family pulled up to their new home, complete with a sedan whose hood ornament is the spirit of Cobra. Fred left Sean and the family at home when Destro and Firefly showed up and requested his help hunting Joes at a certain High Sierra cabin. And it was on that mission that Fred was shot and killed while in a direct exchange with the Joes. A replacement Fred, dubbed Fred 2, came in to take his place as the head of the Brocas household. The kids knew this wasn't their father, even though he looked just like their father. Fred 2, it turns out, was originally Sean Collins, the same one who worked with Snake Eyes' LRP unit. Why did their LRP teammate join Cobra? Well, he was under the assumption that they had left him for dead in Vietnam's Central Highlands, and so he was angry and bitter. So trying to get his new family to warm up to him, Fred took his family to a mall, which is when he had a run-in with Spirit, Blowtorch, and Ripcord. He also had a run-in with Snake Eyes on a ferry and fell overboard just before pulling Snake Eyes' mask off and seeing his true facade. Wade didn't die, but it turns out was laid up and sick in bed with pneumonia back home on Staten Island for a few issues, and when arguing with his fake wife, the kids looked on crying at their broken home. Fred 2, still feverish, ended up tailing Hawk, Stalker, and Snake Eyes in a G.I. Joe Vamp Mark II to a U.S. Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and then to the Vietnam Memorial. And it was there at the memorial in the pouring rain that Fred 2, aka Wade Collins, revealed himself to still be alive. Wade shared his story and how he had returned bitter, unable to get a job, and that Cobra had given him a job and a purpose. But after talking with Stalker, Wade came around and even took Stalker and Snake Eyes to their home on Staten Island. Wade told his new family the error of his ways and that he was breaking away from Cobra and leaving, and that they were free. Instead, they called him Dad. Sean, Heather, and the family left with Wade Collins. So Wade took his new family with him on this new journey, and they took on the last name of Collins in the process. And that's how Sean Brocas became Sean Collins. It wouldn't be until ARAH issue 155, the final issue of the Marvel era on the series, when we hear from the Collins family once again. Sean went to his father to say that he would be 17 years old soon and he wanted to join the US Army. Sean was mad when he said no, and so Wade suggested that Sean write a letter to Snake Eyes for advice. Snake Eyes wrote back a heartfelt letter full of the realities and the impacts of war. Snake Eyes told him of the dangers of romanticizing war and glory when, truthfully, it's terrifying and horrible. People die and sacrifice for what, 10 feet of land? Families are ripped apart as the dead and maimed lay at your feet, and all you can do is collapse numb to your knees in the mud amidst the horror of it all. There's no glory, no adventure in that, only sadness and pain. A lasting pain that will resound in your heart and your soul long after the drumbeats of war have faded with time. Snake Eyes told him to expect to see the worst of humanity, but also the best in selflessness, bravery, and honor. That he had no regrets about being a soldier despite it all. That he served with comrades who would lay down their lives for him, and he for them. Later, Wade told Sean that if he still wanted to join the army after reading that letter, that he would sign the papers. He just wanted Sean to think on it for a while to make sure it was the right decision for him. After that issue, the Joe's pit was shuttered and the whole program stood down, so Snake Eyes and Scarlet went to Snake Eyes' cabin to live in peace and to train a new apprentice with help from Nunchuck and Shebang. This was told in Brandon Jerwa's Master and Apprentice miniseries through Devil's Due Publishing. This first apprentice was a lady named Ophelia. It was during the same time period that Sean did enlist in the U.S. Army and headed to Fort Leonard Wood, where he served his country for a few years before returning to his father, Wade, now depressed since Sean's mother had died. Sean said he was joining a highly classified covert ops unit that would require 10 months of training before his first assignment, which happened to be in Afghanistan. He was on a joint ops team called Hammer Team, comprised of multiple branches and FBI and former Spetsnaz. Their commanders were Special Agent Conrad Hauser and Agent Provost, Duke and Chuckles. Chuckles provided the intel on the next op, which was hunting down the saboteur known as Firefly. Snake Eyes' ninja team, it turns out, was also going to take out Firefly, and so their paths would collide at a fake munitions facility in Ohio. Firefly ended up taking out Collins first, though, being that Shauna was posted at the guard shack at the facility's entrance. Sadly, Ophelia lost her life on that mission along with the rest of Hammer Team. Later, Hauser told Sean how to find Snake Eyes since he'd seen him on the Firefly mission, and so he went to Snake Eyes and asked for help managing his rage and his hurt. And that's when they shook hands and Sean became Snake Eyes' second apprentice. According to his file cards, Sean trained under Snake Eyes in over 12 forms of hand-to-hand combat. He's as proficient with an M4 or M16A2 as he is with a katana or sais or chain and sickle. Sean even has the same Arashikage tattoo as his sensei. The quote on his 2003 file card says, "We don't know how Kamakura talked Snake Eyes into teaching him all those moves, but I do know the hardest part of his training wasn't the bruises and the bumps, it was his 6-month vow of silence." So Sean trained intensely, as Ophelia once did, also with Nunchuck and Shebang, but now also Jinx, and learned physical skills and mental skills, along with the history and the traditions of the Arashikage clan and the history of the ninja. This included the Kamakura period, a long revered golden time of the ninja, Sean said. When Sean was ready, they went after Firefly once again. When they made contact with Firefly, Storm Shadow showed up and Sean was felled in combat. It turns out that Nowhere Man that was using Firefly was a former KGB agent and Spetsnaz commander, the same one who had been a part of a Hammer Team and presumed dead. Budo had to remind Sean that he was forgetting his training, blinded by revenge against Firefly and now Dorenko. It turns out that Firefly had also recruited Sean's father, Wade. Duke then revealed that they thought he was a traitor, double agent, but they had since learned otherwise. He apologized to Snake Eyes for letting himself forget his training, and he was forgiven. Together they all made a move on Firefly and Dorenko, with Sean fighting Dorenko later, just as Wade Collins appeared. Sean lunged at Dorenko with his katana, but Dorenko deflected the sword strike, causing Sean to plunge his blade right into his own father, and Wade succumbed to his injuries shortly thereafter. A few weeks later, Sean completed his training, and it was then that he officially took on the name Kamakura. From a publishing chronology perspective, Kamakura first appeared in the first issue of G.I. Joe in 2001, published by Devil's Due Publishing and Image Comics. In fact, he was one of the first Joes we meet, as he was in the Florida Everglades monitoring the Dreadnought compound, though he was deployed by Silent Master, aka Snake Eyes, and not the G.I. Joe team just yet. He was also able to get photos of Cobra Commander on U.S. soil, which is what initiated reinstatement of the G.I. Joe team. When he reported to duty, Hawk asked, "Who's the Green Power Ranger?" But Duke was able to defend Sean. The team went to fight the Dreadnoughts, with Kamakura battling many on his own. They won and even took Major Blood into custody for a moment. Next, Sean was paired up with Spirit to find Billy, Cobra Commander's son, to try to get to him and Destro, who had now hatched a nanomite plot. They found Billy in Scotland, and when he saw Kamakura's Arashikage tattoo, Billy let them in to talk. Because he wasn't infected with the nanomites, he and Spirit had to go to the biohazard lab so they could be studied to find out how they were immune when everyone else was infected. It took a few months, but he left biohazard quarantine and joined the team at the Philadelphia Naval Base, which was, officially anyway, closed. As the team met, they got word that Storm Shadow had infiltrated the facility, and they went on lockdown and high alert. Shipwreck and Kamakura ran into each other in a hallway, then spied Stormy, so they ran off together to pursue the ninja. This, naturally, led to Storm Shadow and Kamakura fighting with swords and fists and feet covered in blood. It was brutal, but Stormy ended up taking Kamakura down. As Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow fought, Stormy ended up taking Tripwire and Beachhead hostage with his swords, and Kamakura jumped into the fray for his rematch with Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow escaped and sliced Snake Eyes' eyes, and it was Kamakura who had to calm Snake Eyes down, which was an interesting dichotomous switch. Sean went to train more with Snake Eyes at the High Sierra compound for a week, and one of his lessons was to leave his mask on all week. While there, Billy came to them for emergency help with Storm Shadow, who'd broken free of the brainwave scanner changes and needed aid. So they all ran to get in a dragonfly that Snake Eyes had hidden nearby and got to him, but Cobra did too. Kamakura was then part of the invasion of Cobra Island during the time it was under Serpentor and the Coil's control. In that battle, he ended up saving Hawk's life. He then joined a team to go to Tibet to find and apprehend Cobra Commander, who was hiding in a Red Ninja retreat, though the commander managed to escape. When Hawk was shot in the back and was recovering from paralysis at the hospital, Kamakura stayed by his side. And then, after the Red Shadows started taking control, they were murdering Cobra and G.I. Joe alike, and they almost killed Hawk, but Snake Eyes, Scarlet, and Kamakura managed to save him. And during the America's Elite series, Kamakura was reactivated after Snake Eyes was thought killed in action, but was then put back on reserve status again, along with most of the rest of the team, save for a skeleton crew maintaining the rock. And then we have a big plot change. When IDW Publishing picked up the publishing license from Hasbro, Larry Hama came back on board and continued his Hamaverse, picking up the issue numbering where Marvel Comics left off in the 90s. As a result, the Image DDP era was disavowed, and Sean Collins never became Kamakura. He showed up in this original continuity with A Real American Hero issue 206. Here we learn that he still did join the US Army and went through airborne school, ranger school, SOF training, and multiple deployments, including intel gathering missions in Afghanistan, earning a combat infantry badge before returning home, which is where Snake Eyes and Scarlet ran into him while they were out on a food provision run. Sean met with the team and he told them he was winding down and looking for garrison duty, so they suggested he put in a transfer request to the chaplain's assistant's motor pool. Sean was interested, especially if he could pick his own codename. He put in the request, but then he was told he did not get the Joe assignment. He was told he was being flown out to Lackland, but instead Wild Bill dropped him off at the pit. This lie was an attempt to maintain paper chase policy. And then when he landed at the pit, Roadblock said Sean's new codename would be Throwdown. Throwdown's first mission with the team was to drop into the desert near Rudatistan and Alistan to observe and report on a remote Revant robotics facility. And they were able to penetrate the facility by stealing and donning Red Shadow uniforms. Throwdown cut his way through waves of blue ninjas with his knife and the ninjas' own energy whips. It was a complicated mission revolving around a revived Serpentor and mind-controlling massive mech robots. Snake Eyes ended up losing his life in the fight with Serpentor, sacrificing himself to save his team in the process. When one of the mechs flew off to attack the pit, Throwdown donned a Toxoviper suit, complete with a built-in oxygen system, and he penetrated the robot. Re-entry to Earth's atmosphere severely burned and wounded Throwdown's face, and at the same time Snake Eyes lost his life. The burned Sean crawled out of the fires, picked up Snake Eyes' mask, and put it on over his own head. We learned that the severe heat scorched his vocal cords and that he would have a long road to recovery. Sean used a notebook and later a computer tablet to write out his thoughts. Hawk said it was imperative that Cobra not know Snake Eyes died, and so he'd be acting as Snake Eyes going forward. It also meant that Sean Collins would have to officially die, complete with a burial at Arlington Cemetery to maintain the facade. Scarlet then presented him with an Onihashi blade called Lesser Light, forged by the same master smith who made the Arashikage honor sword, Morning Light. After the funeral, Scarlet gave Sean a face mask and brought him in her jeep to the High Sierra cabin. A squad of night creepers were laying in wait near the cabin, but the Joes were counting on that, and the Joe team went to work slicing up the night creepers in the dark of night. And then of course Scarlet and Throwdown were waiting with sharpened blades for whomever got inside the cabin. Throwdown then used the Night Creeper leader as his Trojan horse to infiltrate Cobra Commander's throne room and strike at the commander himself, a message to back off from his family. This was also a PSYOPs mission to convince Cobra that Snake Eyes was still alive. Speaking of psychology, the Collins family home was blown up, but the family was hiding in a bunker under the house. And even though they had gone to a funeral, they knew that Sean was still alive. In a vamp later, Scarlet told Sean he had to stop thinking of himself as Sean, that he went through all the same courses as Snake Eyes, the same qualifications, and even Storm Shadow took him to Japan for some master classes. For all intents and purposes, he is Snake Eyes. He also got some lessons from the matriarch of the Arashikage, Obake Obasan, at Storm Shadow's Water Tower lair. Sean was on the strike team that made entry to his old house and discovered the Cobra World Order plot. and then teamed up with Scarlet to stop a Fred from destroying a dam as part of that plot. Then, as Don Moreno came onto the scene, complete with Snake Eyes' memories in her own mind, Stormy was sharing the Arashikage mindset with Sean, his final lesson. It turns out later that Zartan had awakened a dangerous part of Snake Eyes' memory, and so Sean and Storm Shadow had to search for Don Moreno. They all ended up in Springfield at the community center, where the brainwave scanner was still in the basement, along with Don and the Collins family, who knew by body language, as I mentioned earlier, that Sean was still alive. Though they were surrounded, they were able to escape with help from the Dreadnoks, where Sean put on an Alley Viper uniform and put the Alley Viper in his gear, knocked him out, and it made it look like they had captured Snake Eyes. When they were safe, Granny gave Sean a furoshiki with eye holes to cover his head. He then went with the team to Japan to stop Don Moreno from continuing her bloody trail through the Yakuza and Red Ninja underworld. Scarlet later went to see Anthony in Harlem to have him make Sean a latex face mask, just like he did for Snake Eyes many years ago. Throwdown was on the team that was tasked with tracking down Agent Helix. He was paired with Torpedo and Bombstrike before linking up with the main group, and this is when Bombstrike clarified that Throwdown is Sean's operational codename, but in the presence of Cobra, they were to call him Snake Eyes. He then paired up with Scarlet to stop some terrorists embedded atop the Statue of Liberty. And then the martial artists, still with the team, all showed up at Granny Demon's shop for Sean's birthday party. And it was right after this that Laura 343 assaulted the Joe's Fort Wadsworth compound and captured Throwdown, whom they thought to be Snake Eyes. They brought him to the Springfield Community Center for treatments, and because of this, the entire G.I. Joe team rallied for what ended up being an unsanctioned rescue mission. And because of this, though, he and the team had to go to Washington after to testify before a closed-door hearing. He later joined the team for a rescue mission on a train to Transcarpathia, along with Stalker, Scarlet, Mongoose, Dawn, and another unit in a Tomahawk. Sean took out a cluster of terrorists with the triple flying swallow cut, which impressed Dawn. This while Dr. Mindbender was working on his new brainwave scanner and new DNA regeneration tubes at the Cobra Casino on Cobra Island. The doctor planned to make a Cobra version of Snake Eyes, plus a whole corps of Snake Eyes assassins. Sean had to throw a terrorist out the helo with a grenade to save everyone, and Scarlet pulled him back in, saying, "Not again." Around this time, Wade Collins went to Snake Eyes' cabin, which is when he got a letter that Sean had written to him, basically telling him that he was okay. Scarlet and Throwdown went to the Cobra Casino to provide support to Dawn, Jinx, and Helix, who'd infiltrated the casino looking for intel. He ended up taking out a swarm of casino bats, which is a perfect chance for Laura 343 to try to capture Sean again for the new brainwave scanner and Dr. Mindbender's plot. The team, though, was fighting their way to the brainwave scanner room already, and they were able to take Mindbender and some Vipers quietly into custody. Then Laura and CG and Viper elements were waiting for them in a service corridor, so they were pinned down and they had to call on the extraction team to flank and assist. And it was then that the Joes and Throwdown had a sword fight with the resurrected Genghis Khan. Sean and Dawn then held off the entire army of Cobra, covering their six while the rest of the Joes exfilled to safety. And that's how we leave Throwdown as we go all in and march towards the final issue, 300. On the animation side, he was seen in Valor vs. Venom a couple times, sparring with Jinx, with Storm Shadow, and even in an Ice Saber at one point. And for Sigma 6, it was both he and Jinx who were students of Snake Eyes, training and learning under him, but he ended up injured for most of the show. His first action figure debuted in 2003 with the Spy Troops line, and here he was carded with Night Creeper for a 2-pack. In 2004, he was carded in another 2-pack with Destro for the Valor vs. Venom line. And later that year, he also came in a 2-pack, this time with Storm Shadow, and for the same Valor vs. Venom line. 2005 Kamakura came with the Ninja Lightning Cycle. 2009 Kamakura was part of the Rise of Cobra line, followed by a G.I. Joe Retaliation version that was released in the G.I. Joe Ninja Dojo set in 2012. In November of 2022, another Kamakura released as an Amazon.com exclusive for the G.I. Joe Classified line. To sum up Kamakura, we again turn to a quote from one of his file cards which says, "Kamakura reminds us of Snake Eyes in the early days. He gets in, gets the job done, and gets out before Cobra forces even realize what hit them. And that's just the way we like it." And with that, that's a wrap on this one, my friends. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.